we may be testing the limits of the capacity of this beautiful home here today. Thank you so much for coming out, and I want to say thanks to Rex Reed and Denise and their family for inviting us here today. What a beautiful home and a magnificent just estate, the extraordinary grounds. And when I came in and saw the horses, I just thought that was fantastic. And there will be pony rides right after all of you who would like to take a ride. And of course, I'm glad you laughed because I was, of course, kidding. We'll do all of our horsing around in here today. But I want to say what a pleasure it is to be back in Maryland. John over here put together one of the rallies we had in Maryland back during the 2008 presidential campaign.
And Delegate Reedy, too.
Where's Justin? Justin, who, by the way, got elected to the House of Delegates. In spite of my endorsement, which really says a lot for now. But we were expecting, we thought, okay, Maryland, you know, it's kind of like Arkansas. There aren't that many Republicans that are willing to come out in daylight. And so we were kind of expecting if we had 30 people, it would be a nice little rally. Over 1,000 on a Saturday at College Park. It was absolutely incredible. And I saw then that there was great hope for Republicans in Maryland. I'm going to take just a few minutes to visit with you, and then I'll throw it open for questions, which is the dumbest and most dangerous thing people ever do. But I do it anyway. But just so you know that I understand how it's played, we always call that Q&A, and you think that stands for questions and answers. But if you've ever run for office, what you know it really means is questions and avoidance. You ask anything you want. I do my best for it not to be a career-ending answer. That's the primary idea. We are, I think, living in some exciting times, and I know there are a lot of people who every day think that the country is sort of failing and fading. Just do not count me among that group. I thought what we saw happen the other night with the final termination of the maniac maggot, Osama bin Laden, was a significant event in America, not only to rid ourselves of the menace, but as importantly, it reminded us that when Americans want to do something, we can do it. And we need to remind ourselves that the same country that sent a man to the moon and overcame extraordinary challenges through a depression and world wars and a divided country in the Civil War, and all the things that we have been through, recessions and turmoil in our streets back in the 60s, we are still a country that when we decide that we are going to do what we uniquely can do as a country, we can get that done. And I believe that it was a great moment for America to be reminded of its capacity and its resilience. And by the way, I'm kind of grateful that the last thing that went through the mind of Osama bin Laden was an American bullet. And that the last thing on earth he saw was an American soldier behind a rifle representing a country that he thought he could destroy. Well, I think we said to him, no, you can't. And that's good news for all of us. We are living in some challenging times, and I'm aware of the fact that our economy is in trouble, and I think largely because the leadership we currently have does not understand how the economy is supposed to work. I think it would have really been helpful if Barack Obama just once in his life had actually run something and signed the front of the paycheck and not just the back of the paycheck. It makes all the difference in the world when you understand how business functions. And when you understand that the role of government in the realm of business is that the government is not supposed to play the game, it's supposed to referee the game to make sure it's being played fairly. I've often said that the government is like the referee, the guy in the striped jersey. Its purpose is not to say this big company wins and this one loses. Lehman Brothers goes down and Goldman Sachs goes up. That's not the purpose of government. Government is just to make sure that the game out there in the marketplace is being played fairly. So if a business does well, it's not punished for doing well. And if it really messes up and is recklessly mismanaged, it will in fact fail, which will be the demise it deserves. And it'll also be a warning to other companies who might operate like that. You know, I tell people that I have 3 grown children, one of whom is here with me, my middle son David. He has an older brother and a younger sister. But all of them now are married. Well, one is not married. Come to think of it, he may never be. But I have 3 grown children. They all are out of college and off on their own, and that's a wonderful thing. And for those of you who have children who are still in school in some way, just know the 2 greatest days of your life as a parent: the day the kid is born, and the day that he gets out of college and off your payroll. But there's something that I have learned, and I've learned it from raising kids, and then something else happened. When all of our kids got grown and moved out of the house and went off on their own, my wife and I we'd had a dog. Over the course of a couple of years, we ended up with not 1, not 2, but 3 dogs. We have a Lab, a Shih Tzu, and a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Different as dogs can be. And we love those dogs. And the kids think that we love the dogs more than we love them. We really don't, but we do tell them that the dogs behave better than them. But there is something that I learned from raising kids and training dogs. And here's what I learned. That when you want a certain behavior, you reward it. And you get more of the behavior that you reward. And if there is a behavior that you don't want, you consequence it. And that's how you keep from getting more of it. And a lot of you are nodding your heads and smiling because you've either raised kids or raised dogs, or maybe neither of the above, but you know it's true. So if we want the economy to grow, we should reward the behavior that makes it grow. What makes an economy grow? Well, first of all, if people invest their capital in goods and services that have tangible value, if people save, if people work. I can't think of anything more critical to the economic success of a country than labor and work, that people would have jobs and they would go out and work at something and they would get rewarded for that. And the more they're rewarded, the harder they will work, and that's a good thing. But what happens when we have a government that believes that we ought to punish the productive and subsidize the recklessly irresponsible? Now we're doing the polar opposite of what we ought to be doing to make the economy strong. So if we punish the people who are working and being prudent and thoughtful and careful, saving, putting aside, making sure that they're not dependent upon somebody else because they've taken care of their own needs and assets, what the tax system currently does, it punishes those people. I had an interesting conversation with Congressman Anthony Weiner, New York. Many of you know him. Hey, it could be worse. He could be your congressman. And he was arguing. What? Better off. But he was arguing that the estate tax, or as we as Republicans like to call it, the death tax, that it was perfectly acceptable, that it was a good thing. But here's what doesn't make sense, because you see, in his mixed up and messed up world, he does not understand that if people work really, really hard, or even if they've inherited something, and then instead of getting to pass it on to the next generation, the government is going to get half of it. You know what that really says? Go out and get rid of everything while you're alive.
That's right.
In other words, don't save anything.
Right.
Don't save anything. Spend it all. Where would they get such an idea? From Congress, because that's what they do. And how's that working out for us? It isn't. And here's the point. We ought to reward people who work and who save and who invest. That's what makes the economy strong. And we should not subsidize those who are so reckless in the way that they manage what they do have, that we feel like that we take from the people who have done prudently and give to the people who have acted imprudently. That'd be like rewarding the dog that barks at the expense of the one who's nice. I could put it in child terms, but I'll leave it to the dogs. That's why this country, I'm convinced, is in a real problem, because we've done something very different than our founders ever imagined or envisioned. And their idea was that government would be pretty much local and limited. That we wouldn't have a whole lot of government because we'd govern ourselves. And families would make sure their kids were raised properly. And when kids are raised properly, they don't have to be continually overseen by some outside government entity. Now, the fact is there is a correlation between how well we raise our kids and what kind of neighborhoods we have, and whether or not we're going to have a strong nation. But I want to just remind all of us that The best government we will ever have is the government that is as close to us as possible, because then the people who are governing are actually accountable to those who are being governed. That's the way our founders intended it. Not that we would centralize it in one place, but that we would disperse that power. And what we've seen over the last several generations is increasingly moving the power to one spot in Washington at the expense of counties and cities and states, and has had disastrous consequences. One other thing that I want to mention before I take your questions. A generation ago, we often speak of the greatest generation, the people who were of my parents' age. And they were the ones who went through the Depression and endured World War II and came from that experience and said, we will have children that will never have to suffer as much as we did.